The world needs more people with curious minds. People who aren't afraid to admit when they don't know something. We need to take the time to encourage more lifelong learners. At least that's my goal with this podcast. I think the future is at stake. But at the same time, I do believe that a more informed population can and will move humanity forward. All we have to do is keep learning. All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Nick Learns Everything. So I recently saw a video on Twitter of a baby using hearing aids to be able to hear his mother's voice for the first time. You'll see these videos a lot on the internet. I'm here for all of them. I love those videos. I think it's the best thing on the internet. Every time I see one of those, I click on it. And it's just such a powerful thing because you get an opportunity to see pure joy, I think, in both the kid's face and the mom's reaction. And you just get to see a level of happiness that you can't really explain. You get to see these kids, and like in this particular video, I want to say this kid was maybe like a year old. You get to see them hear their parents' voice for the first time. And the look on their face is just incredible. It's like nothing you can imagine. And admittedly, I don't have kids. But I have a niece, and I love her very much. And I worked with preschool students for a long time. And to just see these little kids and think that they haven't been able to hear their own parents' voice. They haven't been able to hear their own parents say, I love you. And then they can. And it's like the second they hear their voice, it's like you see this joy come over them. It's just incredible. And I'm not an emotional person, but you can't help but feel emotions stir up when you watch a video like that. It's just the coolest thing ever. And I tell you that story because I think it evokes emotion. I think when you think about it and you take a second to put yourself in the shoes of those families, those parents who have this experience, like I said, with this child that they've brought into the world, and they get to see that happiness of them hearing their voice for the first time. Like I said, I couldn't imagine it. You really can't. And it's an emotional thing. It's very powerful, and it's just really cool. I was super happy to see it. I love to see those videos. But I want to take your attention down a different path right now that I think will probably also invoke some emotion, but it's not going to be the same type of emotion. And I hope it does. I hope that you get emotional listening to this because emotion often leads to action, and action often leads to change. And I think there's a scenario that I learned about that requires a lot of attention, emotion, action, and change. You see, I sat down after I saw that video to research child hearing loss. And I thought that's what this podcast today was going to be about. I was going to be able to talk about the hearing aid technology and all of that kind of stuff that comes along with that. But once I started doing some research, I think another topic came up that is far more important for me to address. And so while I was doing that research, I found some other families whose children have hearing loss for one reason or another. For example, I saw the Baker family. I saw the Jimenez family, the Kelly family. And do you know what all these families have in common? Well, I found all of them because they had to create GoFundMe campaigns to help raise the money for their children's hearing aids. Because in the richest country in the history of the world, hearing aids can cost as much as $6,000 per device. And when I say per device, that's per ear. And that's where things take a turn here, because that's the point that I got angry. That's the point where I saw that cost and I became upset because I knew where this was headed. And so I did more research. And luckily, I was able to find a few places where I can place that anger. And hopefully, this podcast episode is going to be able to show you where you can kind of place that anger too, because it's coming. It's don't you worry. In a couple of minutes, it's coming. So after all, like I said, attention leads to emotion, which leads to action, which leads to change. And that's my ultimate goal here with this episode is I want change. And so I want to try to help show you guys what I learned about this. And then hopefully together with our collective voice, we can maybe get some change. So for starters, I learned that in the United States, we have only 23 states that require insurance providers to cover hearing aids. Now, I think that people hear that and they go one of two ways. You're either already mad because it's not all 50 states, or you might be a little more cynical and you kind of figured that was the case. So the fact that we're almost at half the states, you feel pretty good about. And I just want to take a second before you get too excited about that number of 23 to read to you what it actually means in some of those states when they say that. Because they aren't covering anywhere near the full amount. And the language that the states are using when they discuss this topic can be very misleading. So, for example, the state of Connecticut, which, by the way, is the 5th richest state in our country. First of all, thank God for the state of Connecticut. I mean, they are unbelievable. I mean, they're just saving the day when it comes to this. They've gone as far as to require individual and group health insurance policies to provide coverage for hearing aids for children 12 years and younger. So apparently in the state of Connecticut, when you turn 13, your family has some sort of magical financial scenario happen where now you don't even need insurance help anymore. But that's probably why they're the 5th richest state in the country, because every time a kid turns 13, apparently you just get a big bag of money so they can just walk away from needing to help you pay for your hearing aids. Because apparently there's some sort of magical difference in Connecticut when a kid goes from 12 years old to 13 years old. But they also have this fantastic part of the legislation where they decide to allow those insurance policies to limit the benefit to $1,000 every 24 months. So what that means is if the insurance company wants to, they can limit how much they help you pay for your hearing aids to $1,000 every 2 years. Now, if that just happens to be in a time frame, maybe say where a child has outgrown their hearing aids from when they were younger and they need new hearing aids, and that happens in a period of 2 years, which if you have ever been around kids in your life, you understand that they grow crazy see, I don't even they kids grow. That's the point I'm trying to make. Children grow, and in a 2-year period they grow a lot. So it's very possible that you could give them this $1,000 towards the hearing aids, and within the 2-year window, they're going to need more hearing aids. And if it just so happens to be a child who needs 2 hearing aids at say $3, $4, $5,000 a pop in that span, well, now you can see why them limiting it to $1,000 a month if the insurance company wants to every 2 years is a crazy thing. Yet, the state of Connecticut will champion the fact that they require the coverage from those insurance companies. And when you actually read that legislation, you realize that that's possibly the most empty gesture of all time. And so I just think we need to pause and look at the language that those 23 states that require it use, let alone the other 27 states. The fact that they don't even require it to me is ridiculous. The majority of insurance plans, as well as Medicare and Medicaid, don't cover hearing aids. It's just a fact. The majority, more of them don't cover it than the ones that do. And 27 states have no legislation whatsoever to force them to do that. Instead, we have children in the United States who literally can't afford to hear their own parents tell them that they love them. The technology exists. It's there. It exists. We have the technology to help them hear their parents tell them they love them. They just can't afford it, and their insurance won't help pay for it. And the state doesn't require the insurance to help pay for it in a lot of these cases. So they turn to GoFundMe, like I talked about earlier, to be able to have access to that technology. And I know what you're thinking. That is terrible. And you're right, it is terrible. But yet I just know there are still some armchair economists, middle management type people out there who, for some compulsive reason, are going to rush to the defense of this insanity, and they're going to rush to somehow explain it. And it's probably out of partisanship. I get that, because here I am, I'm talking about healthcare. And so all of a sudden we have to somehow be against anything I'm going to say. And people are going to say, well, hearing aids must be expensive, Nick. That's why it's a problem. They're so high tech. They got to be crazy expensive to make. If they're as high tech as they can take kids who can't hear, and then now they can hear. And so all of a sudden you combine that with capitalism, and that's how you get to be able to, that's what the situation. That's why these companies charge as much as they do. That's why the insurance doesn't cover them. That's why all these reasons that someone's going to give you. And to those people that say that, I have two things to say to you. Number one, you are not playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. That mindset makes no sense. You haven't figured it out. You have to stop trying to justify this insanity with some barely coherent argument as if you're some sort of like 9-to-5 office professional by day, but yet you're an economy professor you're an economics professor by night. You all of a sudden understand exactly why this is the case, and you come to a defense of it for some odd reason, whether it's partisanship or ego, I don't know. But if you're one of those people that's already trying to defend this for some reason, you gotta stop. It's insane. That question right there brings me to number two. Because I do think there is some validity in the question of, well, how much do they cost to make? And that really leads us to the true, genuine, solid gold assholes of this story. Let me take a second to introduce you to the big six hearing aid manufacturers, as they're called, who own 98% of the market. Which, what that means is they effectively can do whatever they want, because six companies who are consolidating more and more every year, by the way. So pretty soon it's going to be 4 or 2 that control the whole market. So they can do whatever they want because they don't have any competition in the market. There's only 6 of them. So, to Widex, Signia, Oticon, Resound, Starkey, especially you, Starkey. Especially you. And Phonak. To you, every one of your CEOs, and every one of your board members, I have one thing to say. And that is, fuck you. I hope all of you go outside tomorrow, look around, find the nearest brick wall, close your eyes, and run straight towards it. Because I found out that the average hearing aid costs $300 to make in the factory. And yet, the average consumer pays around $3,000 for one. And don't worry, hearing aid clinics and audiologists, I didn't forget about you either, because according to Consumer Reports, the average retail markup on hearing aids is 117%, which means the assholes at the 6 companies that I just described manufacture them, sell them to the hearing clinics and the audiologists for a boatload of money. And then for those hearing clinics and those audiologists to be able to make money, what they have to do is then mark up the hearing aids 117% and sell them to vulnerable families whose insurance won't cover it. Also, they can get rich. But let me share with you some reporting that I found from the New York Times because I think it really drives my point home in describing the entire hearing aid industry. So we're going to go from the New York Times here. Quote, why have hearing aids become more expensive while cell phones, computers, and televisions have gotten cheaper? Russ Apfel, an engineer who designed a technology now found in all hearing aids, says there's no good reason for this. The hearing aid industry uses every new thing, like digital or a new algorithm, to raise prices, said Mr. Apfel, whose company, Audiotonig, aims to sell sophisticated but affordable devices. The semiconductor industry traditionally reduces the cost of products by 10 to 15% a year, he said. But hearing aids go up 8% a year annually and have for the last 20 years. And I want to just pause here for a second in case there is one human listening to this that is going to try to make some weird argument about inflation. Inflation is about 2% a year. So the fact that hearing aids go up 8% every year has nothing to do with inflation. Anyway, so continuing from the New York Times article, the microphones, speakers, and processing chips aren't that expensive. Those devices in small volumes cost $10 to $15, Mr. Apfel said. He estimated that most hearing aids cost no more than $100 to make. Yet, as I told you earlier, these companies will sell them for up to $6,000 each. And here are the types of things that these companies actually tell people to justify those costs. You can often find these literal talking points on these company websites. You can find them in publications that these companies seem to be paying for. And what they'll say is, they'll say something like, yeah, but the hearing aid does cost $6,800, but it has an 8-year lifespan. So if you think about it, that's only $850 a year. And I mean, honestly, let's break that down. $71 a month. All of a sudden, I mean, when you really look at it, it's only $2.30 a day. I mean, doesn't that sound better? I mean, being able to hear for $2.30 a day is reasonable, right? Yeah. Yeah. I guess that makes a lot of sense after all. You know what? Spending $2.30 a day for my child to be able to use one of their 5 senses so you guys can pay your CEOs $12 million a year. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I got to pay $2 a day for my child to use one of their senses because you guys want to get rich. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. But yet, their salespeople and these hearing clinics are using that type of rhetoric to try to convince people that they're getting a steal. And that to me is insane. And of course, these companies are run by scumbags. I mean, you knew they would be. I knew. Before I even looked it up, I knew. I mean, come on. But don't take my word for it. Let's just ask Jerry Ruzicka, who was sentenced to 7 years in prison after a $20 million embezzlement trial found him guilty of 8 counts ranging from fraud to conspiracy to money laundering. And he was the president of Starkey, which I mentioned earlier, which is one of the largest hearing aid manufacturers in the world. I would have to go back and double check this, but I believe they're actually the largest privately owned hearing aid manufacturer in the entire world. I'm like 98% sure on that. I just haven't looked in a little bit, but I'm like, nah, that's definitely ringing a bell. All these hearing aid manufacturers make hundreds of $1 million a year in revenue, and they're paying their CEOs, like I said, millions in salaries and bonuses, like $12 million a year at some times. I think I saw at one point. It's insane. And to me, honestly, those companies might be run by some of the worst people running corporations today. But the worst part is the fact that this trend isn't slowing down. Because since they have that market cornered, they're going to keep raising those prices. And the thing that's the most upsetting is the fact that Wall Street is taking notice as if it's a positive, which, I mean, you kind of had to figure the people on Wall Street go hand in hand with the people that I'm talking about. But Wall Street really does value what these companies are doing because they have so much market share. For example, 3 days ago, there's a hearing aid manufacturer named Eargo. They filed for $100 million IPO. And the companies that are involved in this space are typically seen as the safest to invest in times of economic downturns because they keep raising prices. They will keep raising prices, and desperate people are going to keep paying those insane prices for hearing aids for their children because guess what? People want their children to be able to hear them, tell them they love them. And these companies are absolutely taking advantage of that. And it makes me sick. It's ridiculous. It is I don't even have words for it because of how insane it is that it's been allowed to happen. It's such a blatant in your face scenario where when you have Wall Street backing it, even they are like, yeah, it makes money though. And I think that is the part that's the most concerning to me. And in 2020, it's amazing that we have this technology. Like it really is, honestly. It's amazing that we have a technology that literally you can take a bunch of different components that have been put together in a factory. All these different pieces have been assembled together in a factory. All these different pieces have their own technology within them. And when you assemble them all together, you're able to put it into the ear of a child who couldn't hear their loved ones tell them that they love them. And then you put this technology into their ear and they can hear it. It's incredible. I mean, it's amazing. It's so cool that we've been able to engineer technology like that. Because honestly, if you go back in history, kids, people in general, but kids with hearing disabilities were often disregarded and shunned. I mean, go back in history. It's not like they were treating people with disabilities well, and if you couldn't hear, you were often disregarded. I mean, let me make sure I get this guy's name right. Daniel Howlett of George Mason University published a really insightful presentation, or it was a paper, but he did a presentation on it. And in the paper, he talked about how during the Salem witch trials in 1692, disabilities like being deaf, he gave like an example of a woman who was deaf. But those disabilities were often considered as signs of a person being a witch. And people would be executed because they had all of a sudden had hearing loss later in life, or they couldn't understand why someone wasn't listening to them, like a child, because the child had hearing loss and they didn't understand it, so they thought it was some sort of possession. And for us to be able to less than or slightly more than 300 years later have created technology that's able to allow these kids to hear is incredible. I mean, the Salem witch trials are not that 300 years ago is not that long ago. I think sometimes people don't realize how recent that is. That is insanely recent. But I can't help but look back at that time the Salem witch trials as a larger point here. Because 300 years later, we look back at that time and we think of those people as just cruel and stupid. They're almost comical. Like it's like a low-hanging fruit to like make a joke about back then because honestly, like back then it was like, "Oh, this bitch over here is doing her laundry on Wednesday instead of Monday." Like, "Whoa, she must be a witch." Like it was like every possible thing that could happen. They just said someone was a witch. Like, "Oh, that kid's right-handed, but he picked up his fork with his left hand. Must be a witch." Like that was like literally how they were operating. So it's like you can understand how ridiculous it is. And we think of those people as ridiculous and stupid, like barbaric. That's how we view them. And so I ask myself, what are we doing right now in 2020 that's going to be looked at 300 years from now as cruel, stupid, barbaric? Because it's going to happen. We're going to have progress. We're going to become more enlightened as a species in the next 300 years, barring some sort of catastrophic event that sets us back thousands or millions of years for all we know. If that doesn't happen, 300 years from now, we will keep having progress and we will look back on now and there will be things that we think of as cruel and stupid that we are doing now. And it seems obvious to me that the way that we currently handle access to affordable healthcare in the richest country ever seems to be exactly what we're going to look at as stupid and cruel. We're going to look back on ourselves as monsters, just like we look back on those people from the 1600s during the Salem witch trials. And I think it's important to really look at that because I don't have the answer to how we get affordable healthcare to everyone. But I think most of the people that you find in life also don't have the answer to that. Most people want it, they don't know how to figure it out, and they just fall into these weird partisan arguments that they don't even fully understand. Like I said, about like these sort of armchair economist type people. And we have to take a look at that. So, where do we go from here? Well, for starters, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story about the president of Starkey. Because I said we'd come back to Starkey. And we need to touch on the president of that company. Now, remember, that's the company where the old president went to jail. But the new president's name is Brandon Sawalich. And, I mean, you might want to know a little bit about him. Because Brandon Sawalich has Twitter, and you could follow him, you could DM him, and he runs one of these companies. And I think that what you definitely shouldn't do is DM him to ask him about that time that, according to the Star Tribune in Minnesota, while under cross-examination, the former CFO, which typically at big companies like that is the second or third person in charge. I mean, they are quite literally helping run the company at the highest levels. So, during a trial at a cross-examination, the former Starkey CFO, Scott Nelson, told the court, quote, that current Starkey president, Brandon Sawalich, was viewed as a liability within the company due to his extravagant lifestyle and affairs with Starkey employees, one of which led to a six-figure settlement. When asked if Sawalich was viewed within Starkey as a, quote, serial harasser of women employees, Nelson replied yes, according to the article. Nelson also said Starkey paid for Sawalich's use of the company jet, many personal purchases, renovations and services at his home, and a lavish 40th birthday party at the Mount Vernon Museum, the historic home of George Washington. And so where we go from here is, if someone was a little bit curious about the type of things I'm talking about, I mean, why not go to the source? I mean, Mr. Sawalich only has about 4,000 Twitter followers. I'm sure he'd love to hear from some more people. Maybe asking him about what was discussed during that cross examination. Maybe asking him why he would want to have his 40th birthday party at George Washington's historic home. Because nothing sounds more fun than a birthday party at George Washington's house. There's nothing that sounds more fun. And I would just like to maybe ask him why that was so much fun, because that sounds like possibly the dorkiest, stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life for someone to do for their 40th birthday party. But hey, to each his own. I mean, this guy's a douchebag at the end of the day, so why wouldn't he have some weird birthday party? But seriously, where do we go from here? I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know the answer to the broader question, I guess, is more the way I should word it, which is, how do we get this affordable healthcare to people? How do we not have people have to pay $6,000 for their child to get hearing aids? I think one place to start is to contact your local representatives and try to get them involved. It's not like these people don't know this is going on. I'll give you an example. 10 hours ago, before I'm filming this, the same guy I'm talking about, Brandon Sawalich from Starkey, was at an event with Lindsey Graham, who is running for re-election in South Carolina, which I am located in right now. And so I think there's a lot of value in reaching out to politicians that represent you to find out where they stand with some of these companies, because they are clearly aware of them. At least where I'm at, they are very clearly aware of them. And I would be very curious to know what your local politician knows about these companies and what they're doing to try to help this specific scenario that I guarantee you impacts people in your community. As far as where do we go from here, I think you can also look into organizations like the Hearing Loss Association of America. That's one of the ones I looked into. There are others. I think they can provide some guidance and education for all of us. I'm certainly not an expert on this just because I'm doing a podcast episode about it. But there are experts that you can find that I think will be able to point you in the right direction of how you can make a difference. And I think if you want to help some of these kids the most immediately, go look at some of the GoFundMe campaigns. Look at some of the stories of these families. And I think that's an easy way to put your dollars to work in the immediate while we work on some of the other stuff. But don't worry, guys. I'm not going to forget about the Big Six. I have a special place in my heart for those guys. After learning about them, I just want you and them to know that I would like this to be a show that doesn't forget things. I mean, this is only episode 3 of this podcast. This podcast isn't going anywhere. And I certainly am not going to forget about those companies or their CEOs. And I sure would love to make what they're doing to those vulnerable people with the pricing, their defenses of why they need that pricing. I would love to make those companies as famous as I can. I mean, after all, what they're doing deserves to be common knowledge, I would say. They seem to be able to defend it. More people should know about the good work they say they're doing. Guys, here's the deal. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and share it with your friends. I know I say that every episode, but I think this one in particular, I'm trying to do my part here with this podcast in this regard. And I think that one thing I've learned from researching this particular scenario is that just getting the word out, advocacy, activism, any way that you can make more people aware of what's going on here, I think that's the best thing that we can do. I'm not trying to sound self-promoting at all. I'm just saying if you heard this and you were like, "Hey, that really resonates with me," if you could just share it with someone or let them know, I think that maybe we can start getting the conversation going a little bit more here. But at the end of the day, like I always say, don't take anything I say all that seriously. I mean, what the hell do I know? I've never price gouged parents on medical supplies that they need for their kids. I mean, maybe when you take advantage of vulnerable people, you're supposed to be someone that people look up to and listen to, and I haven't done it yet. I think my man Brandon definitely has, but I have not. So yeah, don't listen to me then. I don't know. I just don't know. But I think this is a subject that everyone can understand, everyone can get behind, everyone can support some change on. And so we're probably going to be revisiting this topic. I'm going to be honest with you. As always, shout out to my friends and family. I want to make sure I end every show with that. I know I've said that these first couple episodes, but seriously, those are the people that got me here. Those are the people that give me the confidence to be able to continue shooting these episodes and give me the inspiration to keep trying to make them as good as I can. And so, just wanted to shout out, say thanks to them. But I'll see you guys next time. Until then, keep asking questions. Ask questions of the people that should have the answers. And don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something. I'll see you guys next time.